Hello, everyone. My name is Peter Putney. I'm a missionary in Colombia, and I recently wrote an article on my thoughts on the Valera 1602 Purificada Spanish Bible. And so I just wanted to do a quick video going over some of my observations that I talk about in that article. I'll link that article in the description below. And just hopefully this will be a blessing to some English speakers that are trying to decide which Spanish Bible they're wanting to use. And hopefully this will give them some information that'll be helpful. The 1602 Purificada, as it's called, or just 1602P, which I'll probably be saying from here on out just because it's shorter. It's a Bible that was released in 1999 by Grace Bible Baptist Church in Monterrey, Mexico, Iglesia Bíblica Bautista La Gracia. They came out with another version in 2007. That was the whole Bible, and they've had a couple of editions come out since then. The most recent is the 2024, which will be the text I'm using in this review. This is a Bible that is made very similar to the RVG in the fact that they are trying to stay pure to the traditional text of the Bible. And I'm very thankful for that. I commend them for that. I'm a friend of anyone that is trying to stay pure to the traditional text of the Bible, because we don't want the critical text. We don't want corrupt manuscripts in our Bible translations in any language. Now, one thing I will say before I start this review is this is a Bible that is marketed by the promoters of the 1602P as being better than the version that I have been using for the last 10 years, the Reina Valera Gomez, the RVG. And so I just wanted to mention that. I have a feeling probably some people are going to be upset at me for saying anything negative about the 1602P. Because, you know, it is a Bible that is trying to be pure to the traditional text, is trying to be true to the traditional text. And like I said, I am on your side in that respect. But one of the things they do is they do say this is better than the RVG. Here's a photo that they send out. This was a brochure that was received with a Bible order from the 1602P people. And it's a photo of the 1602P sitting on top of an RVG, and it's got, you know, the Reina Valera Gomez crossed out there. And on their material that they promote and present, they often will, say, the RVG is not better than the 1602P. You should use the 1602P. It's a better version. And so people like me should switch to it. I'm a King James Bible believer. I use the King James in English. I believe it's the perfect word of God. And in Spanish, I want a Bible that is faithful to the same text as the King James Bible. I want a Spanish Bible that is going to read like my King James Bible in English, in the sense that, I understand differences in translation. I just don't want it to say something different because it's using a different text, things like that. And so I'm the target audience for this Bible. And so I want to put it to the test in this review. Is this better than the RVG? So I'm going to use the 2023 edition of the RVG and the 2024 edition of the 1602P. And I just went ahead and started doing some comparisons, just started reading the two Bibles together, comparing them. And I wanted to start out this review with just some accuracy issues that I found. I went to the book of Proverbs. I will say I was not directed to go there. I just decided to go to Proverbs. I figured it would be a good book to compare, just because there's so many different phrases and things like that said. You can really see how a Bible is translated reading through that book. So just some verses that stood out to me that I'll just mention as I was going through this. None of these are necessarily, giant critical text errors like you find in other Spanish Bibles, but I do think we need to really put the microscope on these translation issues, because, like I said, it's being marketed as a better Bible than the RVG. So Proverbs 19:7, that was one that stood out to me as I was just reading through the book of Proverbs. It says, "Buscará la palabra y no la..." I'm sorry, let me read it in English first. "All the brethren of the poor do hate him. How much more do his friends go far from him? He pursueth them with words, yet they are wanting to him." So that is the King James Version, and the last phrase here, "he pursueth them with words." In the 1602P, it says, "Buscará la palabra y no la hallará." So what that basically is saying is, he pursueth the word and does not find it. So that is the translation of this. It's completely different than what the verse is intended to say in context. The context here is the brethren of the poor hate him. The poor, his friends go far from him. The poor man is pursuing his friends with words, but the 1602p says the poor man is pursuing the word. It's just not the same thing. The RVG correctly translates it, los buscará, so he's pursuing them, con palabras, with words, y no los hallará, he will not find them. So that's one problem I had. That's definitely not better than the RVG. It's a faulty translation, and I believe this is just left over from the 1900. I'm sorry, I haven't checked the original 1602p on this, the original 1602 on this verse, but I did notice the 1909 and 1960 had the same thing. So I'm assuming this is probably something from the original 1602 that they just didn't fix. But you'd have to look into more of that. Don't quote me on that, but that's what my assumption is. Okay, so the next verse here that I wanted to mention that I ran across as I was just reading through is Proverbs 21:25. The King James says, the desire of the slothful killeth him, for his hands refuse to labor. He coveteth greedily all the day long, but the righteous giveth and spareth not. So in the 1602p, one of the things that I found was interesting is right here where it says, I can, that changes the subject of the verse. So it says in the 1602p, el deseo del perezoso le mata, porque sus manos rehusan trabajar. That's fine. And then he says, I can todo el día codicia con avaricia. So instead of being he coveteth greedily, referring to the lazy man, it basically says there are people that covet greedily all the day long. Just kind of changes the subject, and you really just lose the point of the verse. And that is that the slothful man coveteth greedily all day long. It's not just some random person. The RVG doesn't do that. It doesn't add in those words, I can. It just says todo el día codicia. So the subject is still the slothful man in verse 25. So that was another issue I found that I felt was fairly, significant enough to notice and to mention, especially if you're trying to say which Bible is more faithful, more textually accurate. Some other issues I ran into just reading through Proverbs. The 1602p says lion cub instead of lion. It says cachorro de león. And Proverbs 29:29 says bodies instead of back. That's just less specific. Equally is added to the verse in Proverbs 20:12. I am not sure why, but that was another difference I noticed. Proverbs 22:19 says merciful instead of bountiful. Proverbs 22:23 says judge instead of plead. Those are all fairly significant changes that change kind of the way the verse comes across. And so I felt like they were worthy of mentioning as I was kind of doing some comparisons. Now, some of these verses here, you may say, oh, this is, these aren't the hugest deal, and okay, but the point that they're making is this better than the RVG. Should I, as an RVG user wanting a textually pure Bible, should I switch to this? I just don't think it holds water, because this is 4 chapters. I mean, these examples are between Proverbs 19 to 22, and these are all things I found in just reading 4 chapters. So I've not read the entire 1602p. Full disclosure, I've not read the whole Bible. I have read the RVG multiple times, but I'm just assuming that if I'm finding this much stuff and reading 4 chapters, I'm going to find a lot more going through it. I think it's just not as thorough when they did the revision. I don't think it's been nearly scrutinized and thorough. I've gone through thoroughly like the RVG has, trying to clean up some of these translation issues. Many of them left over from some of the older Spanish Bibles. So one thing I did find very interesting, and like I said, these are both Bibles that are aiming to be textually accurate. They're wanting to be from the same textual Greek and Hebrew base as the King James Bible, and that is important. And like I said, I commend the 1602p for that, as well as I do the RVG. But one thing I didn't notice, and this might just have been an oversight from the 1602p revisers, in Proverbs 25:24, they have, instead of housetop, as it says in the King James, they have casa or house. Now that's not a huge difference, but it is a difference, because if you go and you see there's later on in the verse, it says housetop. It is better to dwell in the corner of a housetop than with a brawling woman in a wide house. If you look that up in the Hebrew, there are actually two different Hebrew words. And the first one is very clearly housetop. It's a very clear word, housetop. Now, why did they not say housetop? Why does it say house? Well, the original Reina Valeras, the original Reina, and then the Valera revision done in 1602, they were known to contain some erroneous texts like the Septuagint. Reina used the Septuagint in some of his translation work back in 1569. And so one thing I did is I went and I looked it up in the Septuagint. I have a Lexham English Septuagint, and I have the Greek version as well. But just, for this is an English review, in the Septuagint, which is a very corrupt Old Testament manuscript. I've got other videos on that if you want to check those out. But it says, it is better to live on the corner of a house than with a shared building with an abusive woman. It says house again here. And so I don't know if this is just left over from Reina maybe using the Septuagint when he translated this verse. I don't know that. I don't know why this is in here. All I'm saying is I think that the RVG here would be crowned above the 1602p as the winner when it comes to textual accuracy, because this is the same as it is in the Septuagint. And, maybe that's just a coincidence. Maybe that's leftover Septuagint from back in 1569. And like I said, I just don't think they were as thorough in going through their Old Testament, especially when it comes to the Bible revision here. And so the next thing I mention in my review, and I'll mention it here too in this video review, is the grammar of the 1602p. The 1602p kind of prides itself on using outdated grammar and not updating a lot of grammar. And it's not everything. So they updated salud, for example, an old Spanish word for salvation, and they changed it to salvación. And that's a good change, and they should do that. But there's a lot of things they didn't change. Like, for example, they have in Proverbs 20:13, no ames el sueño, porque no te empobrezcas. That is an old way of saying it. Para que is how you should say it nowadays. It's just not. This is a very old, outdated way of saying this. So in the RVG, it's correct. No ames al sueño para que no te empobrezcas. And in the English, if you don't speak Spanish, it's love not sleep, lest thou come to poverty. It's, it's the consequence. And so it's just not clear. It's not good Spanish, modern Spanish. In the verse, this is Proverbs 23:35. Forgive me, I forgot to put the title up here. Proverbs 23:35, it says, no, not Proverbs 23:35. I'm sorry. This is, there we go. Proverbs 23:35. Proverbs 23:35, it says, y dirás, hiriéndome y no me dolió, azotáronme y no me lo sentí. This is an old, what's called an enclitic pronoun. This is an old way of saying things in Spanish. This is no longer correct. So Spanish is governed now by the Real Academy Dictionary of Spain. They define correct Spanish grammar and Spanish words, and these are outdated. These are not supposed to be used hardly at all anymore. And so you can see the RVG updates this, and they say it the way you're supposed to say it nowadays. Me hirieron, me golpearon. And that's how you're supposed to say things in Spanish. So the point is it just, when you read this Bible from the pulpit, it does sound very outdated and incorrect in many cases, even with their words they're using. For example, in Proverbs 23:13 through 14, this was another one I noticed as I was just reading through it. It uses the word herir when it comes to chastising a child with the rod. So in the King James, it says, if thou beatest him with the rod, he shall not die. Thou shalt beat him with the rod and shalt deliver his soul from hell. But the problem is the word that they used here, modern day, means to hurt and to injure. And if you just look it up in the RAE dictionary, the official Spanish dictionary, and pretty much any Spanish dictionary, the definition you're going to get is to cut, to damage, to injure, to hurt. And that's not the idea of the verse. So the RVG uses the word castigar con la vara, which gives you that idea of you're punishing with the rod. You are smiting with the rod, but not in a way that is intended to injure. It's just the word. It's an old usage of the word that just does not work anymore. And if they're going to update salud to salvación, I think that these are other words that you need to update when you do this. The worst, by far the worst of all of these old grammar problems in the 1602p is this one. They say Jesus Cristo 80 times instead of Jesus Cristo. So you ask any Spanish speaker anywhere, I mean, maybe, I'm not going to say anywhere, maybe there's an exception, like a 0.01% exception in somewhere where maybe somebody says Jesus Cristo, but 99.9% of Hispanic speakers say Jesus Cristo. They put the two words together. That's just how you say it in Spanish. There's nothing wrong with that. I saw somebody say that was a mutilation of Spanish to put the words together. I'm just thinking, man, that you're saying every single Spanish speaker in the world, with the exception of, I don't even know anybody, but maybe if there's an exception, I don't know of it, but that is not how you say Jesus Cristo. Everybody says Jesus Cristo, not Jesus Cristo. Jesus Cristo is just wrong. And they do that. I don't know, maybe they're trying to stay true to the two Greek words there, but the problem is it's just not good Spanish. It's horrible Spanish, and nobody says Jesus Cristo. So if you're preaching from the pulpit and you're saying Jesus Cristo, it just sounds silly, and it's a linguistical error, and it makes it harder to communicate the scriptures. This is just not correct. I don't know if any other Spanish Bibles use this, but I know some of the older Bibles say Jesus space Cristo, and when you say it, it sounds exactly the same as if you write it apart or not. But this is just wrong, and it's something I wish they would have not chosen to do, because it's very awkward for people. Now, another one one thing I want to mention before I move on is the excuse that probably a lot of people are going to hear for this, and I've heard it from the 1602p promoters, is that this is just, they shouldn't update the Spanish because the King James uses archaic English, and therefore they should use archaic Spanish as well. We shouldn't try to modernize the language in any way, shape, or form. And I just don't think that argument really holds water when it comes to translations. That's kind of a false equivalent. So, we have a lot of languages we translate the Bible into around the world, and none of them are we really using this standard that I need to go back 400 years and use the language from 400 years ago. So that in of itself causes it to be a strange argument when we're talking about the Spanish language. But in specifically comparing Spanish and English and forgetting all the other languages that we have translation work going on in, you got to remember that the King James was the pinnacle of English literature. It is probably the best English literature book ever produced. I don't think there's even really competition for that. And it is not the same, cannot be said of the 1602 Valera Spanish Bible. The King James is readable to children. Even 400 years later, I was saved out of a King James Bible when I was 10 years old. The 1602p is not... the original 1602 Reina Valera is much more difficult to understand, I think, for a Spanish speaker than for the English speaker in some of these archaic terms. And the other thing I was going to say is that the 1602p is a Bible released originally as a New Testament in 1999. The King James was released 400 years ago. So I think the King James has a lot of credit and ability to say, hey, this is okay to have this archaic English in here that everyone has been reading and using for 400 years continuously as the most popular English Bible. We understand it. It's not a problem. And then come back and say a Bible releasing in 1999 should use really archaic Spanish that is really hard for people to understand and easily misinterpreted. I just don't think it's an apples to apples equivalence. And I think it's an argument that proves too much, because if you were to take this same argument and try to apply it to every single translation project in all these other languages that we are trying to do, I think it would just be a huge mistake. So I think it's more of an excuse than anything. But I think as far as grammar, the RVG definitely takes the cake in that area. Moving on, I want to talk about la palabra instead of el verbo. Okay, they use two different words in the RVG and the 1602P in John 1:1. So John 1:1 uses the word la palabra in the 1602P, and the RVG uses the word el verbo. Now, the problem with this is la palabra is a feminine word, and so in the old Spanish Bibles, when they use the word la palabra, it would use feminine words in verses 2 and 3. So in verse 3, for example, it would say ella, todas las cosas, it would say all things were made by him, but it would say all things were made by her. And without her was not anything made that was made. It was just very awkward because it was calling Jesus her. So in the 1602P, they tried to fix that and they changed the words to masculine pronouns here. And I really feel like that was a little bit of a mistake. These masculine pronouns it takes the emphasis off of who it's talking about. So in Spanish, the pronouns always match the gender of who you're talking about. And when they say all things were made by him and then use a female subject noun in verse 1, it's just really kind of makes it so that the normal reader in Spanish, he's going to see that and he's going to think that the person that it's referring to is God in verse 2. So in verse 2 where it says, the same was in the beginning with God. God is a masculine noun. So the pronouns match God, not Jesus, the word, in verse 1. And just as a Spanish reader, I think that the tendency is going to be for them to think that when it says all things were made by him, it's referring to God, not the word, Jesus Christ. And the whole purpose of this passage is to show that Jesus is the creator of the universe. And so I think this was a mistake to do it that way. It's kind of interesting. The New World Translation does the same thing. They use the word and then they use these other pronouns so that it kind of makes it seem like God is the one who is the creator, not Jesus, the word. And I personally just don't think it was a smart choice. Now, they really try to dunk on the RVG with this particular point. They have a whole, if you go on their website, Valera1602.org, you can check it out. They have a 33-page article written by Gail Ripplinger titled Catholics Changing God's Name. And in that article, Ripplinger basically, she goes back to the Latin and she says that the Latin word from whence came el verbo, which, by the way, if you look it up in the dictionary, is the word, the second person of the Trinity. She says that word was originally changed from another Latin word, which was done by Pope Novatian. And then Jerome put it in the Latin Vulgate. And it's just very interesting because Novatian was a guy who lived in 200 to 256 AD. There were no popes during that time. The Catholic Church did not come into existence until 325 AD, if you know your church history. And so it's just it's an article that's got a lot of problems and makes a lot of claims that are not correct. Now, what she says then, she kind of shows a chart and says, the Catholics want us to use el verbo, and so she shows how the original 1569 and 1602 Reina Valera, they all used la palabra, and then she goes and shows that, Catholic revisions have changed it to el verbo, and this is like some great Catholic conspiracy, and we don't really know what the nefarious reason is the Catholics did that, because it doesn't really make a lot of sense as to why they'd want to. But I think the argument kind of falls apart, because if you really kind of look into it, the word el verbo, as the Spanish name for the second person of the Trinity, Jesus, the word, that goes back to Spanish Bibles translated back to 1250 AD, okay? And then also, if you look at modern Spanish Bibles that Catholics use, like Dios habla hoy, they use la palabra. And so if the argument is like they're changing la palabra to el verbo because the Catholics are, in some giant conspiracy theory here, that doesn't hold any water because they use Bibles that say la palabra. So it doesn't make sense what she's saying. Her arguments are not, I link in my article a good argument showing this is just a bunch of nonsense, honestly. There's also a lot of good information going back into the Latin. There are a lot of Latin manuscripts that use el verbo, which go back before Jerome's Latin Vulgate. So what she says there is not correct. And it was just, there was two synonymous words back in the Latin, and there's an argument for why el verbo is the correct translation. But the fact of the matter is in Spanish, leaving behind all the Latin origin words, in Spanish, el verbo means the word. It doesn't mean the verb, as sometimes people say. Jesus isn't the verb because verbo can mean verb in Spanish, but when it's used with a capital letter, it means Jesus Christ, the Word, the second person of the Trinity. All the dictionaries say that. Everybody in the Spanish world knows that. I just think it's a really shallow, rough argument to try to make a big deal out of that. And when you use el verbo, it's a masculine noun, which allows you to then use masculine pronouns and, refer to Jesus as he, not she, and not lose the point of the verse that Jesus is the creator of the universe. So I'm going to give it to the RVG on that. El verbo is better than la palabra, and it's not a dunk like they think it is to say la palabra instead of el verbo. Okay, getting to the end here, Señor o Jehová. All right, so the difference in the 1602P versus the RVG translates the Old Testament word for God, Jehovah. As you know, there's 4 Hebrew letters there that mean the word of God, Jehovah. And the King James Bible translates it Señor most of the time. And that is done in all caps to let the reader know that it is the word Jehovah, which are those 4 Hebrew letters there. They're only consonants. There's no vowels. And that is how it's done in English. So they tried to basically mimic that in Spanish. And I really don't think it's an advantage over Jehovah. The Valera and Reina, they really fought to keep the word Jehovah and not use Señor. And so the 1602P, when it changes that, it makes over 6,000 changes directly against what those two translators wanted to do. And so it's kind of hard to really justify calling it a Valera translation when they do that change. But I mean, it's not something I'm upset about, and I don't dislike necessarily say, which is better. I don't think that saying Señor here is superior to saying Jehovah in Spanish, just because Jehovah is how we say it in Spanish. That's just how it's been in the Spanish Bibles. That's how we say it. And it's not an incorrect translation. It is what the word says. Señor in all caps is what the King James translators put there to tell us that this is Jehovah, the name of the Lord, those 4 Hebrew letters. So I disagree. If someone was to say, I think the 1602P is better because it uses Señor and not Jehovah, I just really disagree with you on that. And I don't really think that that's superiority over the RVG. Jehovah is not inaccurate in any way, shape, or form. That's what Señor in all caps means. It's the same thing. So anyways, continue on. The last issue I have with the 1602P, and this is really enough that would make me just really try to shy away from it, is when they send out their literature and they promote the 1602P, they're sending out articles by Robert Breaker. Now, Robert Breaker, one of the things they sent out, and I've got a copy of this, but it's like an old comparison chart used from an earlier edition of the RVG, and they used different arguments that are, quite frankly, kind of ridiculous. One of the verses that they present in this article is when the King James says, "Offer thy gift," the RVG says, "Presenta tu ofrenda," or present your offering. The present and offer are the same. They're synonyms. It's the same definition in Spanish. But they bring that up and they kind of just make a big deal over stuff like that I really feel like is not that big of a deal. One of the things that when people are commenting on the RVG versus the 1602P, they made a big deal out of Genesis 2, or Genesis chapter 1, where in the King James it says, without form and void, the earth was without form and void. And the RVG said, as it did in the older Spanish Bibles, that it was desordenada, disorganized. And that was, their big one, that this is why you should switch from the RVG to the 1602P. I didn't really think it was that big of a deal, but I did see in the 2023 edition of the RVG that is now without form. That has been changed. And I think it's a good change, but it's not anything to really dunk on the RVG anymore. But those are kind of the kind of things that they have been bringing up in their articles that they pass around attacking the RVG. Another one is Psalm 23:2, where they criticize the tense that it uses, where it says, he maketh me to lie down in green pastures. In the King James and the RVG, it says, he will make me to lie down in green pastures, using the future tense. And if you check the tense of the Hebrew verb, you find it's in the imperfect tense, which means actions that are not completed or actions that occur in the present or future. And in Spanish, with the many different verb tenses, I just don't think using the future tense here is an egregious problem. And I don't really think it conflicts with the tense of the English, nor in the Hebrew there. And so I just think that it's one of those things that it's kind of a nitpick that I don't really have a problem with personally, especially if you just go a couple chapters forward in the 1602 Purify. They do the exact same thing, but on a much deeper scale. Instead of using the past tense like the King James does, where it says we were like them that dream, they use the future tense. They say we will be like them that dream. And so, it's kind of like you're trying to tell me I need to switch from the RVG to the 1602P because it's ada instead of, where the King James has it maketh, even though the tense of the verb is, can go either way there, and they don't conflict when you consider the different tenses. But then we have a problem. But then it's okay for the 1602P a couple chapters later. I just don't think the argument really holds water. So those are the things they pass around. But this chart that they, text around and pass around in these examples, a lot of this information comes from Robert Breaker. They have his articles on their website. And Robert Breaker is a former missionary who was dropped by a sending church for lying about his ministry and his sending mission board. And he is the pastor of an online-only church called Cloud Church. thecloudchurch.org. You can go there and watch his videos. You can donate in Bitcoin if you want to. It's really interesting, but Breaker is somebody that has called, I've read his articles online, they're still up, calling RVG users kind of like a cult. He had one article or one YouTube video of his I watched one time on the RVG, attacking the RVG, and he said something that I felt was kind of libelous. And all of those things, I just don't think he's really the person that they would want to have as the face of their Bible. But he's the one that they're sharing all their articles from, and their printed materials has his stuff on it on their website. His stuff is on it. When they're trying to tell people to get away from the RVG, go to the 1602P, they're sharing Robert Breaker. And I just really think it's a bad call by them because it's just identifying them with someone that has very little credibility and very little testimony. And if you want to just kind of find out more about this guy, I just encourage you to watch some of his YouTube videos and read some of the stuff on his website. And you're just going to kind of see, wow, this is not somebody that you want to be the face of your Spanish Bible revision. So I was confused by that. And I think it's something that the people of the 1602P should consider. Okay, last thing I want to mention, the name Valera 1602 Purificada. And sorry, this review is going a little bit long. I'm almost done here. The 1602 is the Valera 1602. They leave off Reina, which Reina was the original translator. Valera was the guy who revised Reina's work. And I really feel like this is kind of sad that they left off Reina. I was told by someone who was on the original committee that they left off Reina because they didn't like some of his doctrinal positions. But they did leave Valera on there. And I feel like that's a disservice. So that's kind of sad. Reina, whether you agreed with him on all his doctrine or not, he was the one you're using his work. But that's neither here nor there. It's the Valera 1602P. It is interesting, though. The people that promote the 1602P will say things like, unlike the RVG, we were not interested in putting a man's name on our revision, but yet they have a man's name on their revision. In English, we use the King James Bible. You have the Tyndale and so many Bibles that use that bear the name of the workmen that were on it. And I don't really think it's a slam dunk that they think it is, because it kind of just doesn't make a lot of sense. If they don't want the name of anybody on their Bible, they should probably take off Valera, I guess. But anyways, that's just my opinion on that. So in conclusion, I believe that the RVG is still the preferred version here. I am very thankful for the RVG. It's been a great Bible. Very accurate, very linguistically up to date. It is great Spanish. It is textually pure, accurate translation, and I'm very thankful for it. I'm not going to switch to the 1602p. I wish the users of the 1602p well. I commend them for wanting a Bible that has purity, but I do think that they should probably stop, trying to attack the RVG in order to promote the 1602p. Because I don't think that what they're saying is accurate, that it's a better Bible than the RVG. I think the RVG is superior here, and I'm going to continue using it. So anyways, the importance is textual purity. Amen? We want to have textual purity in Spanish, and like I said, I'm thankful that the 1602p is trying to stay true to the textual purity of the traditional text, the King James Bible, and its textual base, and thankful for it in that regard. So I hope this has been a help to someone, and hopefully it'll help some people that are kind of trying to figure out what is the difference between the RVG, the 1602p, hearing the arguments from both sides, give you a little bit of a better way of making an informed decision. All right. God bless you. Have a great day.